The keycard printer jammed again at exactly 2:47 a.m. That was the third time that winter, always the same hour, always that grinding click like it didn't want to spit the card out. Len was downstairs doing rounds and I was alone at the front desk. Snow tapped gently against the windows in that soft, constant way that made it easy to forget how cold it really was outside. And then I heard the lobby door open. No footsteps, no voice, just that soft chime, and then silence. When I looked up, a man was already standing at the counter, coat soaked, hood up, not moving. He didn't blink when I greeted him. He just placed a room key on the desk, one of ours, and whispered, "Not until 2:47. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever stayed somewhere that just didn't feel quite right. And if these stories help keep you company, consider subscribing so you won't miss the next one." My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened. Back then, I worked night shift reception at a lodge tucked up in the Colorado mountains, mostly ski season folks. Occasional lost travelers, and the kind of long-haul drivers who just needed a bed and blackout curtains. Len Turner handled overnight maintenance, checked on the boiler, restocked the towels, that kind of thing. The job wasn't glamorous, but I liked the routine. I liked the quiet. Until that night. It was early November, still pre-holiday, but the first big snow of the year had just rolled through. The kind that layered everything in silence and made the whole parking lot look like a blank sheet of paper. By 10 p.m., all our checked-in guests were settled. The phones had gone quiet, and I had a hot cup of chamomile behind the desk. Around 12:45, I started hearing gusts press against the windows, that deep howl of wind that creeps in through old seals. And just past 1 a.m., the keycard printer jammed for the first time. It was always finicky in the cold. I opened it, cleared the ribbon, reset the feed, and made a mental note to have Len check the wiring again. He was making his rounds on the third floor, which meant I was alone at the desk, not unusual. But for some reason I had that feeling I was being watched. The kind that doesn't come from noise, just pressure. At 2:03 a.m., a woman came through the front entrance. No coat, no suitcase, just a dark hoodie soaked to the sleeves and hair that looked plastered to her cheeks. She didn't hesitate, walked straight to the counter like she belonged there. "Please," she said, "please just let me inside. I can explain. I just need a place to sit. Please don't make me go back out there." I looked behind her. The parking lot was still empty. No other footprints. She kept glancing over her shoulder like someone might come bursting through after her. I asked if she was a guest, and she shook her head. "I don't have a room." I didn't know where else to go. I should have told her to leave. I should have called someone. But there was something in her voice, not panic exactly, but urgency. Like whatever she'd seen out there hadn't gone far. I buzzed her in. She crossed the threshold like she'd been holding her breath for miles. I asked her name. She said Jenna. No last name. She didn't look much older than 30, and she kept wringing her hands like she couldn't quite feel them. I offered her a towel from the utility closet and a bottle of water. She thanked me, then asked if there was a side exit. "Just the front and the fire stairwell," I said. She nodded, then sat in one of the lobby chairs with her arms tucked tightly across her chest. I tried to ask if she was in danger, but she didn't answer directly. Just said, "He found me." I saw him watching my window again. Her voice broke a little on the word again. Len came down about 10 minutes later, and I pulled him aside. Told him we had someone sheltering in the lobby and asked if he could check the cameras. He nodded and ducked into the back office. When he came out, he looked uneasy. No one came up the path. No car, no lights, just her walking in from the side lot. The side lot was where deliveries came in. It wasn't plowed. I walked back over to Jenna and asked if she needed the police. She shook her head immediately. If he sees them here, it'll get worse. I just need to be invisible until morning. I didn't like it, but I also didn't want to send her back into a snowstorm. At 2:40, the keycard printer jammed again. Same error, same clicking sound. When I opened it, I found a used keycard already inside one for room 213. It was smeared with moisture like someone had held it in a soaked glove. I hadn't printed any new keys all night, and room 213 had been vacant since Tuesday. I walked back to the desk to ask Jenna one more time if she was sure she hadn't taken a room, but the chair was empty. No footprints on the floor. No sound from the hallway. Just the bottle of water half drunk and the towel folded neatly over the armrest. Len and I searched every floor. We checked the cameras again. She was never seen leaving. The last frame we had was her sitting in the chair looking toward the hallway. And then, nothing. I still have that keycard. It's tucked in the back of my desk drawer, scuffed and faded. Every now and then I find it pushed slightly closer to the edge. And the printer, it still jams at 2:47. Always the same sound, always the same room number. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories that makes people laugh at first until they see you're not joking. Then they get quiet and the subject changes. It happened 2 summers ago, when I was driving a route through Mississippi. I've been doing long-haul deliveries since I was 21, mostly food service stuff, now canned goods, snack packs, bulk orders. That stretch of road between Jackson and Mobile always made me feel a little uneasy, but I never had a reason to call it more than a gut feeling. Until that day. I'd already been driving a few hours longer than planned. GPS cut out on me around 3 in the afternoon, and the signal didn't come back. I figured it was one of those rural dead zones, so I kept going until the 2-lane turned to cracked pavement, then gravel. Nothing around but tree line and heat shimmer. The sky had that late summer haze where the edges of things blur, and the sun just hangs there like it's too tired to set. I remember thinking I'd stop at the next place with a restroom and some vending machines, maybe even a cold drink if I was lucky. What I found was something else entirely. The sign said Country Motel General Store. That's it. No phone number, no brand, no vacancy light, just painted wood hanging from a rusted pole and a small L-shaped building tucked into the trees. It looked weather-beaten, but not abandoned. The kind of place that used to matter when the road was busier back before the interstates cut through the middle of everything. There were 2 cars parked out front, one an old brown pickup, the other a sedan with plates I didn't recognize. I figured maybe I'd stretch my legs, grab a snack, and keep moving. The inside smelled like old plywood and cigarettes, not strong, just present. The store was one large room with dusty aisles, faded chip bags, a soda cooler that hummed a little too loudly, and a worn register up front. The man behind the counter looked like he hadn't left that stool in years. Late 60s, maybe older. Skin like sun-dried leather trucker cap pulled low, hands folded on the counter. He didn't smile, just nodded once like he was surprised I'd walked in at all. I asked if they had any rooms, mostly out of curiosity, and he said, "One left," pointed to a door in the back, and mumbled that I could sign the guest book later. The key was already sitting on the counter, a real metal one, not a card on a chain with a faded tag that just said 5. I should have walked out. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe it was that heat where your judgment feels like it's stuck in molasses. The room was bare-bones mattress that looked like it hadn't been flipped in decades, wood paneling, a little TV with a bent antenna. There was no air conditioning, just a box fan in the corner and a single overhead light with a soft buzz. I left my duffel on the bed and went back into the store to grab some water and chips. That's when things started to shift. The man behind the counter was still there, but now his posture had changed. More alert, somehow. His eyes followed me when I walked past. Then he said something I still hear in my head sometimes, right before I fall asleep. "We keep the good stuff in the back freezer. You'll like what we've got there." His tone wasn't friendly. It was flat, like a line he'd practiced. I laughed politely and said I was fine, just needed something light. But he insisted again. "Better snacks in the freezer. Come on back, just for a second." He didn't smile. His eyes didn't change, just that blank expression, and his hand resting near the edge of the counter like he was waiting for something. That's when I noticed the smudge on the floor, a dark red streak dried, going from the cooler past the counter mat and out of sight behind the register. The smell hit me next. Faint, but wrong. Not garbage, not expired milk, something sweeter and heavier. I've worked with refrigerated freight long enough to know the difference between spoiled meat and something dead. I told him I needed to make a call, stepped outside with my phone held up, pretending to search for a signal. The second I hit the sunlight, I felt cold. It was still sweltering out, but my skin crawled like I'd just stepped into a freezer myself. I walked calmly, too calmly, back to the room, grabbed my bag, and didn't bother locking the door behind me. As I crossed the lot, I saw the old man come out of the store. He didn't shout, didn't ask why I was leaving, just stood there, hands at his sides, and watched. His face didn't change, no anger, no confusion, just that same empty stillness like he'd seen this before. I drove until the next real town 20 miles north, pulled into a gas station with people, lights, and signal. I sat there for a long time, not sure what to make of it. Maybe it was just a weird encounter. Maybe the guy was strange. Maybe the smell was nothing. But then I saw the headline, "Young woman missing, last seen passing through the same area I'd just come from. Her car had been found abandoned near a gravel road. No other details. No photos released yet. Just a vague description of where she was last seen near a country motel with a store attached." I didn't sleep that night, parked my rig in a well-lit lot with other trucks, and kept a wrench under the seat. The next morning I called the tip line and gave them everything I remembered: the man, the store, the freezer, the stain, even the smell. They took my report, but didn't say much. I never heard back. A week later, I went to look it up again. Tried Google Maps. The building still showed on satellite view, but the business listing was gone. No phone number, no reviews, just like it had never been there. People ask why I didn't go back. why I didn't try to find the place again. I did. Once, months later. Nothing was there, just trees, a concrete slab, no sign, no door, no freezer. But I still remember that voice, the way he said it. "You'll like what we've got back there." And the way he didn't react when I left, like I was just one of many who changed their mind too late. Some nights I wonder what would have happened if I'd been more tired, if I'd followed him behind the counter, if I'd opened that freezer door. And more than anything, I wonder if someone else did. I grew up in a town that's so small it doesn't even have a real bus route. Our biggest store was a Rite Aid, and our school cafeteria doubled as a voting center during elections. So when our dance team made it to regionals in Indianapolis, it felt like the closest thing to a big adventure we'd had in years. We stayed at a 2-star hotel booked by the school. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, a microwave, and 3 beds crammed into one room. At 17, I didn't care. I just wanted to dance, hang out with my friends, and maybe stay up late without our parents breathing down our necks. I shared a room with Taylor and Mariah. We'd known each other since middle school, one of those easy friendships built on inside jokes and years of shared bus rides. That Friday night, we rehearsed until our muscles ached and got back to the hotel around 6:30. Our room was near the end of the second-floor hallway, with a dusty view of the parking lot and a vending machine that looked like it hadn't worked since 2009. Across the hall, maybe 5 feet from our door, was another guest room that seemed unoccupied when we arrived. The curtains were always drawn, and the lights inside never seemed to change. It was around 7:00 when I first saw him. We were getting ready to go downstairs for dinner, and I had just stepped into the hallway when I noticed a man standing in the doorway across from us. He was in his 40s, maybe older, with greasy hair pulled back into a loose ponytail and a faded red flannel that looked too heavy for the warm weather. One foot was inside the room, the other just over the threshold, like he wasn't sure if he was coming or going. When the hallway light hit him, he turned and looked straight at me. Not curious, not angry, just locked in like I was a photo he needed to memorize. I stepped back inside and shut the door. I didn't say anything to the girls right away because I couldn't explain what felt so off. Maybe he was a trucker, maybe he was maintenance, maybe I was being dramatic. But when we came back up from dinner an hour later, he was still there. Same spot, same stare. This time he didn't retreat when we walked past. His eyes followed us all the way back to our door. We joked about it at first. Mariah said maybe we finally had a stalker, which was only funny because we didn't really believe it. We turned the chain lock and shoved a chair under the knob, not because we were scared, but because it made us feel like we were in control. Something teenagers do when they don't have the words to say, "I'm nervous." I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of the door handle rattling. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then it came. Again, a slow, steady jiggling, like someone testing the lock. The room was dark, except for the street lamp glow bleeding in through the edges of the curtains. I sat up in bed and held my breath. Taylor was snoring softly. Mariah had stirred too, her eyes wide in the dark. We didn't speak. We just listened. After a pause, there was a soft thud. Not a knock, more like someone gently pressing their weight against the door, slow and deliberate. The chair under the knob creaked slightly, but didn't move. We stayed frozen for what felt like forever. No footsteps, No more rattling. Just silence so thick it felt like it had shape. I clutched my phone under the blanket but didn't think to call anyone. I just held it like it might protect me. Eventually, I whispered to Mariah, and she mouthed back, "Don't open it." That was all we could manage. Neither of us got up. Taylor somehow slept through it. We waited until we couldn't hear anything, then a bit longer just to be sure. When morning came, we laughed about it, brushed it off, told ourselves someone must have had the wrong room. That's what you do when you want things to be normal again. It wasn't until I bent down to grab my shoes that I noticed the chain lock was unlatched. I know I had set it before we went to bed. I remember testing it twice. Mariah saw it too, and we both went quiet. Taylor finally paid attention when I showed her. Then she pointed out something else, a thin scrape near the edge of the door just below the latch, like someone had wedged something in there, tried to pop it open. We went to the front desk, trying to explain. The girl behind the counter couldn't have been older than 20. She barely looked up from her phone. When we mentioned the lock and the noise, she asked if we wanted her to call maintenance. I asked if there were cameras in the hallway. She shrugged and said maybe, but only the manager could check them. We competed later that day, but none of us danced right. I kept seeing that man's face in my mind. The way he didn't smile, the way he just stared. After the event, we packed our bags and went down to check out. Before we left, I convinced Taylor to come with me back to the front desk one last time. The manager, a middle-aged man named Dean, was on duty now. He actually listened. When I told him everything, he typed our room number into the system, then led us into a back office. He pulled up footage from the hallway camera and fast-forwarded through the early hours of the morning. And there he was, the man in the red flannel. He left his room 4 separate times between 2:00 and 4:00 a.m. Each time he walked straight to our door and stood there. Never knocked, never tried any other doors. Just stood still for minutes at a time, staring. At one point, he even placed his hand on the doorknob and leaned in like he was listening. Then he would turn and disappear back into his room. I asked Dean who he was. He hesitated, then checked the guest list. The name registered to that room was Stephen K. Something forgettable. He had checked out just after sunrise, left without stopping at the desk. No luggage, no trace. The hotel refunded us one night, offered to let us file a report, though they said there wasn't much the police could do since no one was hurt. We went home the next morning, but something in us had shifted. Mariah started locking her bedroom door at night. Taylor stopped staying in hotels altogether. And me, I kept thinking about that chair under the doorknob. I think it saved us. A week later, I got a message on Instagram. No profile picture, no name, just one line. "You girls dance beautifully." I froze. When I clicked on the account, it was already gone, deleted. I didn't tell the others. I locked down my profile and changed every setting to private. I've never been back to Indianapolis. I've never stayed in a cheap hotel again. But I still think about that scrape on the door and the way someone stood outside our room for hours. Quiet, waiting, watching. Back in 2019, I was living about 40 minutes outside Richmond and working inventory at a warehouse, long shifts, swing hours, mostly just stacking pallets and updating stock logs. I had just moved out of my parents' place and was still figuring things out. Bills, food, loneliness. That in-between phase where you're technically an adult, but not all the way there yet. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just wanted to talk to someone who wasn't a coworker or my landlord. That's how I ended up downloading one of those sketchy dating apps nobody really admits to using. Her name on the app was Alyssa. Blonde, soft smile, a little shy looking in the photo. Supposedly 21. We messaged for a couple days, nothing deep, just jokes, favorite music, small talk. She asked if I wanted to meet, said she'd be at a motel in Petersburg that weekend. The message came with an address and a room number 206. It was a 2-story place with red neon signage and a row of rooms facing a cracked parking lot. The kind of place where nobody asks questions. I pulled in around 9:30 that night. There were only a couple cars, one beat-up pickup near the end, and a dark Honda with tinted windows about 4 spaces from mine. I texted her to say I'd arrived, and she replied instantly, "Doors open. Come in." That should have been my first red flag. No hi, no, I'll be right out. Just an open door. But I'd already come this far, and I figured maybe she was just nervous. I walked up the metal stairs and found the room easily. The door to 206 was open a few inches, the bathroom light spilling into the dim room beyond. I knocked once gently, then stepped inside. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, only it wasn't the girl from the pictures. Her hair was darker, her face older, maybe late 20s. She didn't smile or say anything, just sat there still as stone staring at the wall like she'd been waiting a long time. I said her name Alyssa, but she didn't respond, just nodded once, barely noticeable. I stood there awkwardly unsure of whether I should sit down or leave. That's when I heard the door click shut behind me. I turned and there was a man standing between me and the exit. Mid-30s, solid build, wearing a black jacket. Same one I'd seen in the Honda downstairs. He didn't say a word, just stood in front of the closed door, hand on the knob, eyes fixed on mine. Something shifted in my chest. Not fear, exactly. Not yet. Just a sharp internal jolt, like my body registered danger before my brain did. I pulled out my phone to call someone. Anyone but the screen froze. No signal, no bars. I restarted it, but it stayed the same. The woman on the bed still hadn't moved. She finally muttered something. "It's fine. You're fine." But she didn't sound like she believed it. I took a small step backward toward the corner of the room. My voice was thin when I asked what was going on. Neither of them answered. The man stayed in place. The woman stared straight ahead like she wasn't part of it at all. Then I moved toward the window, pretending to check outside. Just trying to think. Just trying to get some air. But what I saw out there made everything snap into focus. Someone was crouched beside my car. They weren't even trying to hide hood-up gloves on driver's door already cracked open. Their head popped up for half a second when they saw me look. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but they had something metallic in their hand, maybe a tool, maybe something else. I turned back toward the room, my stomach clenching. My voice was louder this time, sharper. "I left my wallet in the car. I'll be right back." The man at the door took a single step forward. Just one. But it was enough. I didn't think. I ran for the bathroom, slammed the door, locked it, and looked for a window. It was small, one of those you'd never expect someone to fit through, but I was skinny and scared and out of options. I yanked it open, shoved myself through the narrow frame, and dropped hard into the alley behind the building. My arm scraped against the bricks and my phone hit the pavement. I scooped it up and ran. I circled wide around the motel, staying in the shadows until I reached the front lot. The Honda was gone. My car door was open, glove box rifled through papers scattered on the seat. I didn't stop to see what was missing. I just jumped in, started the engine, and drove. The signal came back about a mile down the road. I pulled into a gas station, parked under the lights, and just sat there for a while. The adrenaline wore off slowly, replaced by something colder, that realization of how close I had come to something I still can't fully name. When I checked the app again, the messages with Alyssa were gone. The entire chat thread was blank. Her profile had vanished. I couldn't even prove I'd talked to her at all. There was nothing to report. I hadn't been robbed. Not really. I hadn't been hurt. But I knew something was wrong. The way they'd coordinated, the way the man had locked the door without hesitation, like it wasn't the first time. For the next few weeks, I was paranoid. I parked 2 blocks away from my building, slept with a knife under my pillow, checked the back seat every time. I got into my car. Nothing ever came of it, no follow-up, no sign of the people I'd seen. But one day, out of impulse, I drove back to that motel in Petersburg. It was still there. Same sign, same layout. Room 206 was being cleaned by an older housekeeper. I asked her casually if the room had been booked 2 weeks ago. She looked confused, said it had been out of service for repairs until just a couple days ago. That was when it really hit me. Whoever gave me that room number shouldn't have had access. They weren't supposed to be there, and yet they were waiting. The woman on the bed, the man at the door, the figure outside. It was smooth, practiced, mechanical. And I keep thinking, what if I hadn't run? What if I'd hesitated 5 seconds longer? I don't know what they wanted. I don't know who they were. But I know I wasn't the first person to walk into that room. And I'm not sure I was supposed to walk back out. Back in 2022, I was driving back to Tennessee after spending the weekend with my brother and his wife in Georgia. I'd planned to make it all the way home that Sunday night, but somewhere around Macon, I hit a wall. I'd barely slept the night before, hadn't eaten since noon, and the road had started to blur around the edges. I knew better than to push through that kind of exhaustion. As a nurse, I'd seen too many stories end badly because someone tried to power through when they should have pulled over. I took the next exit I saw and found one of those low-slung roadside motels, the kind that wraps around a cracked parking lot, with flickering lights and a dying ice machine outside. The sign just said, "Rooms available," in fading plastic letters, and the lobby smelled like a mix of old coffee and bleach. It was just after 9 p.m. when I checked in. The woman at the desk didn't even look up at me until I cleared my throat. She was older, maybe in her 60s, and her eyes never really met mine. She handed me a key for room 108 and pointed toward the side of the building without saying much else. The room was what you'd expect, floral bedspread, stiff with starch yellowing walls, and a rattling AC unit crammed into the window. I threw my bag down, kicked off my shoes, and laid back on the bed for a minute, just to breathe. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have drifted for a while. When I woke up again, the room was dark, except for the light from the bathroom I'd left on, and I realized I was parched. I grabbed a few quarters from my bag and stepped out to find the soda machine the desk clerk had mumbled about. The air outside was thick, like the weather couldn't decide if it was going to rain or just hang heavy over everything. A silver pickup truck was parked 2 spaces down from mine. Older model. Nothing flashy windows rolled down just far enough to see someone had been sitting inside. I made my way around the side of the building, where the vending machines hummed against the brick, casting a dull glow across the pavement. That's when I heard a voice behind me, low, polite, almost apologetic. "Hey, excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to bother you. I'm locked out of my room. You wouldn't happen to know if the office is still open, would you?" I turned, and there he was. Late 30s, maybe, older. Denim jacket despite the heat. Dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in a while. And that kind of gaunt look some people get when they haven't slept in a few days. His eyes darted constantly, not just tired, but scanning everything. I told him I wasn't sure if the office was open, but offered to walk with him to check. He smiled a little, but not with his eyes, and started walking beside me. Close, too close. I could feel something off almost immediately. Not anything obvious, just that low, warning hum in your body that says, "Don't brush this off." We turned the corner together, and that's when I realized how quiet the place was. No traffic noise, no TVs behind the curtains, just the hum of the machines and our footsteps on damp concrete. I started to say something I don't even remember what, but before the words left my mouth, I noticed he wasn't looking at the office anymore. He was staring directly at me. Eyes narrowed, shoulders tight. That's when he said it. "You weren't supposed to see anything." I stopped walking. My brain couldn't process it at first. I asked him to repeat himself, but he just stepped forward and shoved me hard against the wall. My ribs hit the brick with a sickening thud, and I felt the burn before I even saw the knife. It wasn't small, not a pocket blade, but something serrated like a hunting knife you'd see in a case at a pawn shop. My hand went to my side, where I could already feel the warmth spreading under my shirt. He muttered it again like he was talking to himself this time. "You weren't supposed to see anything." I screamed loud and raw. Not out of fear, not yet, but from the shock of it. He raised the knife again, and I thought that was it. I tried to twist away, grabbing for the edge of the ice machine beside me. Anything to pull my weight in the other direction. Just as the blade came down, another voice exploded behind him. "Hey, drop it!" The impact came with a clang. A burst of white powder like chalk suddenly filled the air between us. A fire extinguisher slammed into his arm, knocking the knife from his grip. He stumbled back, coughing, covered in foam. The man who hit him, someone I hadn't seen before, kept swinging until the attacker collapsed to the ground. I fell against the wall, clutching my ribs, trying to breathe through the pain. The man who saved me, a tall guy, bald maybe in his 50s, dropped the extinguisher and knelt down beside me. Asked if I could move, if I could talk. I think I managed to say my name. Maybe hospital. Everything after that is blurry. Another guest had heard the commotion and called 911. The ambulance came faster than I expected given how far out we were. They loaded me in with a cracked rib and a puncture wound, shallow, thank God. The ER doctor said I was incredibly lucky. The man with the knife, his name was Kevin Bishop. Police told me later he had a record assault, breaking and entering even a kidnapping charge that had been dropped a few years back. He'd checked into the motel using a fake name. No ID, just cash. The officers told me another guest had heard screaming earlier that evening, maybe from the same room he was in, but when staff checked, there was nothing there. Later, they found dried blood in room 203. The man who saved me was named Ronald. He was a trucker just passing through. Said he'd stepped out for a smoke and saw something in the corner of his eye. I sent him a thank you letter a few weeks later, even included a photo of my nieces. He never responded, but I hope he kept it. I don't stay at random motels anymore. I don't go anywhere alone at night if I can help it. People always say, trust your gut, and I didn't. I ignored it because I didn't want to seem rude, didn't want to assume the worst. But now I'd rather be rude than be dead. And I still don't know what I saw that night. I hadn't noticed anything before. No argument, no blood, no strange movement. But maybe I caught something I didn't realize. A name, a room number, a voice behind a door. Something he couldn't afford to leave behind. He looked me in the eye when the cops led him away. Not angry, not pleading. Just hollow, like I'd ruined something for him. The last real job I had was working overnight security at a regional airport just outside Springfield. It wasn't a glamorous post, no bustling terminals or long TSA lines, just one main runway, a scattering of short-hop carriers, and a skeleton crew once the final flights had landed. I'd been there almost 4 years when this happened, and I had a routine. We all did. Quiet nights, soft fluorescent lighting in the terminal, the distant sound of air vents pushing dry air through empty halls. It was the kind of place where you counted time by the buzz of vending machines and the glow of motion sensor lights blinking on when no one was there. The hangars were what you'd expect, tall, echoing warehouses lined up like oversized tombstones along the Eastern Service Road. Most were leased to charter companies or old-timer pilots who didn't mind paying to store their little Cessnas inside. But Hangar 3 had been empty for over a year. The owners had stopped paying rent after a dispute, and operations sealed it off pending legal review. I knew this because I was the one who padlocked it. So when Dennis, the new guy, young, polite, maybe too eager, came over the radio, just after 2:30 a.m., and said, Tom, there's movement inside Hangar 3. I figured it was just a raccoon, or maybe a wiring issue triggering the sensor. I told him to stay in the terminal and that I'd swing around in the truck to check it out. The night was unusually still, no wind to speak of, and the moon sat heavy behind a film of thin clouds that made the tarmac look grayer than usual. When I pulled up to Hangar 3, the first thing I noticed was that the outer floodlights weren't on odd, since they were on a dusk-to-dawn timer that rarely failed. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out of the truck, and walked up to the main doors. The padlock was still in place, rusted but intact. I scanned the perimeter, checked for prints or signs of tampering, but there was nothing. Still, the motion sensor inside had definitely gone off. I logged the check-in and moved on. Back in the terminal, Dennis was waiting near the monitors. He pointed to the corner feed with a nervous edge in his voice. Watch this. He rewound the feed and showed me the footage from about 10 minutes earlier. The inside of the hangar lit up for a moment, just a few frames, as if the sensor had triggered the internal camera, then went dark again. But something was different. There was a figure in the middle of the space. No uniform, no flashlight. Just a faint silhouette standing perfectly still in the center of the floor. I leaned closer. There was no shadow, no movement. Just presence. Then it was gone. I checked the timestamp, 2:34 a.m. We radioed the county dispatcher mostly to file a report. Officer Rhonda Trigg showed up about 40 minutes later, good woman, quiet, sharp. She came with bolt cutters and a clipboard and asked all the right questions. We opened the hangar together. The air inside was thick and stale, like cardboard and engine oil. Our flashlights cut through the dark in tight cones. There was nothing inside. No equipment, no ladders, no sign of intrusion. But over near the east wall, something had been dragged. Not far, maybe just a few feet, but enough to leave faint lines in the dust like someone had scuffed their boots while being pulled sideways. We searched the whole place, found nothing. No footprints, no belongings. But when Rhonda called in the registration number posted on the hangar door, just routine. Something to confirm the lease records dispatch came back with a pause. The hangar wasn't in the system anymore, hadn't been since 2009. That didn't make sense. I'd personally sealed it the previous spring. There were documents, work orders, my own initials on the inspection forms. But county property logs said Hangar 3 had been removed from active use 6 years earlier, and the last listed tenant had died in 2011. We pulled the maintenance logs. Same story. Everything after 2009 was handwritten. Not in the database, not even scanned. When we checked the signature lines, most had just a single letter. Sometimes T, sometimes R, sometimes a blank. I asked Rhonda if there'd ever been incidents like this before. She hesitated, then said something that still sticks with me. "We've had dispatches out here," she said. "Reports of lights in Hangar 3. Even before you were hired. We usually write it off as sensor malfunctions, power surges, stuff like that. But I've seen footage, and there's always one thing missing." "What's that?" I asked. "Reflections." I didn't sleep well for weeks after that. I kept replaying that image in my mind, the figure, standing in the dark, facing nothing, perfectly still. No outline, no shadow. I even drove past the airport one night on my day off just to see if the lights were on. Hangar 3 was dark, but as I sat there in the car watching through the chain-link fence, the internal camera light blinked on. Just for a second. No motion, no alarm. I don't work there anymore. I took a job managing security at a hospital in Peoria. Better hours, brighter lighting. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I still dream of standing in that cold, concrete room, the silence, the dust, and that faint outline in the dark, waiting for something, or maybe remembering someone. I used to take short-term nursing contracts in places most people have never heard of, towns, with only one traffic light and motels that still handed you real keys. Back in 2017, I spent 3 weeks in Waverly, Kansas, filling in night shifts at a small rehabilitation center just off the county road. It wasn't a hospital, more like a quiet place for post-op recovery and long-term elderly care. The staff was kind, the patients were sweet, and the building, though old, had that gentle smell of antiseptic and oatmeal that comes from years of routine. For the most part, it was peaceful. The center had 26 rooms, all in a long L-shaped hallway, with a nurse's station at the bend. On my first night, I was given a map, a set of keys, and a reminder that room 204 was used for storage now. "It's been vacant since 2015, said Mrs. Ellison, the night receptionist. "We keep the door locked and the lights off, but sometimes new nurses get confused and try to do rounds there." I nodded, didn't think much of it. Every place has a room like that too, full of old equipment or paperwork to be useful anymore. The week went by smoothly. Most of the patients were asleep by 900 jours. Nora, a retired teacher recovering from hip surgery, liked to talk about her garden in spring. I brought her chamomile tea on my breaks and learned to recognize her voice even when she whispered. It was a slow rhythm, quiet work. But around the third night, I started noticing something strange. I'd be walking past room 204, always locked, always dark, and I'd hear what sounded like breathing. Not mechanical hissing like from oxygen or vents, human breathing. Just one breath sometimes, two like someone had just turned over in bed. The first time I thought I'd imagined it. The second time I stopped, listened, and convinced myself it was air moving through old ducts. But the third time, I felt the hairs on my arms rise before I even heard the sound. That low inhale, barely audible, like someone was waiting to exhale until I passed. I mentioned it to Mrs. Ellison in passing, jokingly, really, but she didn't smile. She just said, "Well, like I said, that room's been empty since 2015. Then she paused, her eyes lowering toward her desk. After what happened, she wouldn't say more. But that night after my shift ended, I stayed back and pulled the old paper logbooks. Room 204 had belonged to a man named Franklin Merritt. He was in for a stroke recovery and apparently quite paranoid toward the end. There were repeated notations from staff about him insisting there was someone else in the room with him. One note, dated May 3rd, simply read, "Patient states the man only speaks when I sleep, says he smells like rust and static." On May 6th, Franklin died in his bed. The cause was listed as cardiac arrest, but there was an asterisk and a staff report that mentioned he was found with his hands clamped over his ears, his fingernails bloody against his scalp. After that, the room was decommissioned, but no record explained why the door had to be locked from the outside. 2 nights later, around 2:11 a.m., I was doing rounds when I noticed the door to 204 slightly ajar. I froze. The hallway was completely still. No lights on in the other rooms, just the soft blue glow of the emergency exit sign behind me. I stepped closer, every footstep louder than I wanted it to be. The air near the door felt cool, like it does when you first open a freezer. I tapped lightly. "Hello?" No response. I eased the door open and scanned the dark room with my flashlight. The bed was still there, stripped bare, no mattress, just a rusted frame. A wheelchair sat in the corner. A folded blood pressure cuff was on the side table, dusty and unused. And then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it. A long, slow inhale, not mine. It was close, maybe 5 feet away, maybe less. I turned back quickly, light darting across the room. Nothing moved, but the space between the bed and the corner seemed off. Not darker exactly, just quieter than it should have been. I shut the door, locked it, and returned to the nurse's station. I told myself the building was old. That sounds echoed. That I was tired. But I also took the small white strip of paper from the key log and moved room 204's entry tab 1 space lower on the clipboard, just so I wouldn't have to see it every time I checked the rounds. On my final night, Nora asked if I'd be back again in spring. I said, maybe. I smiled. I didn't tell her that I'd already asked the agency to take me off the rotation for Waverly. I didn't tell her that I'd started hearing soft clicks in the hallway during my breaks, like the wheels of a walker that wasn't there. or that I'd once found a folded patient gown on the counter of the locked med closet with the name Merit handwritten on the tag, even though I knew that closet was inventoried and sealed every morning. I don't know who was breathing in that room. I don't know if Franklin Merritt ever had someone with him in those final nights. But I know that every building has corners. Time forgets rooms the living no longer enter, but the echoes still do. That was the last one I'll share tonight. And thinking back across them all, the motel desk clerk, the fishing camp stranger, the footprints in the snow, the gas station visits the locked hangar, and that room in Kansas, I've started to notice something. These places weren't dramatic. Most were plain, unremarkable, unfamous, and yet something always waited just beyond the ordinary. Not monsters or murderers or things from a movie, but details that didn't fit, people who didn't belong, sounds that didn't line up with time or space or memory. The scariest moments, I think, are the ones that don't scream at you. They just stand very still and wait until you finally realize they shouldn't be there. If you've made it this far, thank you. Maybe these stories reminded you of something small a night you couldn't sleep because something felt off, or a hallway you didn't want to look down again. And maybe that's all it ever is. A quiet moment remembered too clearly. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If these stories kept you company tonight, consider following the channel, sharing it with someone who loves a good, quiet scare, and subscribing for more nights like this. And if you've ever heard something in a room that was supposed to be empty, I'd like to hear your story too.